Secret Saboteurs, the French resistance of World War II. The French resistance's covert operations represent a profound reaction against the Axis occupation and the collaborative Vichy regime, sparking a multi-phased revolution in military strategy, intelligence gathering, and social defiance that ultimately paved the way for radical post-war reform of French governance, universal rights, and the national spirit. The fall of France in June 1940 was not merely a military defeat. It was a total collapse of the democratic order and the end of the Third Republic. In just 6 weeks, the French army, once considered the finest in Europe, was crushed by the German blitzkrieg's overwhelming speed and armored power. This military catastrophe triggered an immediate reactionary shift in French life and politics. Under the terms of the surrender, France was divided into two: the occupied north, controlled directly by German forces from Paris, and the so-called Free Zone in the south, governed from the small town of Vichy. For many, the war was over. The priority shifted from national glory to day-to-day survival under an oppressive regime. The Vichy government, led by the octogenarian Marshal Henri-Philippe Pétain, didn't just cooperate with the Nazis. They actively sought to dismantle the Republic. They replaced the national motto of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, with the slogan Travail, Famille, Patrie, Work, Family, Fatherland. This was a direct ideological assault on the rights established by the French Revolution. The state became a willing tool of the oppressor, implementing anti-Semitic laws and rounding up Jewish citizens before the Nazis even formally requested. A culture of collaboration and silence descended upon the country, creating an environment where suspicion was the norm. On June 18, 1940, Charles de Gaulle spoke into a BBC microphone. He declared,
Quoi qu'il arrive, la flamme de la résistance française ne doit pas s'éteindre et ne s'éteindra pas.
His voice was a revolutionary spark. Initially, the resistance was a disorganized revolution of the spirit. It was composed of ordinary citizens, teachers, students, and laborers who began with small acts of defiance, like cutting phone lines and painting V for victory on walls. By 1942, this turned into a revolution of action. The introduction of the Service du Travail Obligatoire, the forced labor draft, became the resistance's most potent recruiting tool. Thousands of young Frenchmen fled to the countryside. These men became the Maquis. They lived in the mountains of the Vercors and the forests of Brittany, surviving on meager rations. They weren't just avoiding work. They were forming a genuine revolutionary army. Beyond the mountain hideouts, a different kind of revolution was unfolding. In the cities, through the efforts of the cheminots, or railway workers, these individuals executed a strategy of bureaucratic and physical sabotage that paralyzed German logistics. They engaged in what was known as the slowdown strike, where paperwork for vital military shipments was intentionally misfiled, sending tanks meant for the Eastern Front to remote sidings in the south of France. According to documents preserved in Galexy, these workers also utilized sugar sabotage, pouring sugar into fuel tanks to destroy engines without the need for explosives. This was a revolution in resistance tactics that prioritized infrastructure over direct combat, proving the civilian workforce could be just as lethal as a traditional army. Furthermore, the War of the Waves transformed the radio into a revolutionary weapon. Clandestine broadcasts and the BBC's Radio Londres allowed the resistance to bypass the censored reactionary media of Vichy, creating a unified national consciousness among a fragmented population. The resistance was also a fractured mirror, divided by ideology and background. The communist FTP viewed the occupation through the lens of a global class struggle, launching aggressive urban assassinations that often drew brutal German reprisals. Meanwhile, the MOI consisted of foreign-born fighters, including Polish Jews, Italian anti-fascists, and Spanish Republicans, who saw the defense of France as a defense of universal rights. Their presence proved that the revolution against Nazism was international in scope. To succeed, these desperate groups needed a radical reform of their internal structure. Jean Moulin was the architect of this reform. Parachuted into France by de Gaulle, Moulin's mission was to unify these factions into a single cohesive force. On May 27, 1943, Mohn successfully chaired the first meeting of the National Council of the Resistance. This unification was a political revolution, transforming the Shadow Army into a strategic military asset capable of coordinating with Allied high command. While Mohn handled politics, women like Marie Madeleine Fourcade led the intelligence revolution. Her network provided the Allies with a detailed 55-foot map of the Atlantic wall defenses. According to records at the National World War II Museum, this was vital. Without this intelligence war, the D-Day landings would have been a blind assault. Another spy, Jeannie Rousseau de Clans, provided intelligence on German rocket programs, allowing Allied bombers to target sites effectively. As June 1944 approached, the resistance went into overdrive, using coded messages broadcast by the BBC, such as "the carrots are cooked." The Allies signaled the resistance to begin sabotage. In the days surrounding the Normandy invasion, the resistance paralyzed the German response. They blew up nearly 2,000 locomotives and cut hundreds of miles of telegraph wires. These actions delayed German panzer divisions, giving Allied troops the critical window they needed to secure beachheads and begin the liberation of Europe. The climax came in August 1944. As the Allies neared Paris, the citizens rose in a people's revolution. Barricades were built using overturned cars and cobblestone. On August 25th, the German garrison surrendered. Paris was liberated by its own people, signaling the end of the reactionary Vichy experiment. However, the human cost was staggering. Over 100,000 resistors were executed, and thousands more were deported to concentration camps. Jean Moulin, a civil servant and hero of the French resistance, died under torture by Klaus Barbie, never revealing his secret. His sacrifice became the moral foundation of the post-war state. The significance of the resistance extends beyond the battlefield. It was a catalyst for profound social and political reform. As the war ended, the French people had to deal with the legacy of collaboration through a process of purification. The épuration, or purge, was a reactionary attempt to cleanse the nation of those who had aided the enemy. While it began with chaotic, unofficial punishments, it eventually transitioned into a formal reform of the judicial system. Thousands of officials were removed from their posts, and high-ranking collaborators, like Pierre Laval, were executed, ensuring that the new Fourth Republic was built on a foundation of resistance values. The most significant social reform was the extension of the franchise. In October 1944, French women finally gained the right to vote, a direct acknowledgement of their revolutionary role as couriers, spies, and fighters. Furthermore, the resistance reformed France's international standing. By forming the Provisional Government of the French Republic, former resistance leaders prevented the United States and Britain from treating France as a defeated, occupied territory. This allowed France to secure a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, reclaiming its status as a great power. The resistance proved that the human desire for sovereignty cannot be crushed. It demonstrated that civilian cooperation is the backbone of liberation, and that a revolutionary reaction to tyranny leads to lasting reform. The French resistance was the hidden gear in the Allied machine. It was a turning point that moved the world from occupation towards liberation. Their legacy remains a blueprint for courage, proving that when rights are threatened, the revolutionary spirit of the few can change history and reform a nation, that a hope of freedom can become a reality.